Welcome back to another episode of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos, then I would hope you would hit the like and subscribe button. Today, in episode 3, we're talking about the ever-important topic of classroom management. For those beginning teachers out there, I can almost guarantee that any job interview you go to for the secondary or primary level, the people on your panel and the administrators will most likely ask you about your classroom management approach. And so it's really important to have a good answer, a quality answer for those questions. And so hopefully some of the things we talk about today will help you in that discussion as well as your classroom in general and making a better classroom atmosphere, more productive atmosphere. In my opinion, this topic of classroom management can be broken up into two parts. The first part is this proactive, preventative classroom management, where you attempt to stop and prevent misbehavior, before it happens. Right? This is the ideal, that we do not have misbehavior occur, but we can prevent it before it happens. That's the goal. Of course, it always doesn't happen like that. And so that leads us to part 2, which is the reactive intervention to behavior. This is more commonly referred to as discipline, when we have to deliver consequence and sometimes correction to what the student is doing in the classroom. And so today, in our part 1 of episode 3, we're going to talk about this first part of proactive, preventative classroom management. Before we get to that, let's take a step back and think again about episode 1 when we discussed your personal approach to teaching, your teacher identity, and who do you want to be as a teacher. And I think, in my opinion, this kind of is really important here in this classroom management approach. Do you want to be a disciplinarian? Do you want to be more of a drill sergeant? Do you want to have more of a love and logic approach? Do you want to be more compassionate and kind? These are all different approaches, and it kind of depends on your personal approach. I know in my experience, my first years teaching, I really felt disconnected between who I was as a person and who I was trying to be as a teacher, that I was trying to be more authoritative and more disciplinarian. And it was kind of needed for that classroom. But I didn't really feel that's not my style. I'm not that approach of being authoritative and you must do it my way. And there are many teachers who are very successful at both of these methods of being more authoritative and disciplinarian, as well as being more kind and compassionate. The problem is sometimes if they're too compassionate, then they're kind of a doormat for the students and they walk all over them. And if they're more authoritative, then they lack the students' respect and they don't really gain that respect and they're really disliked. And so finding that balance and finding who you are and implementing that into the classroom is so important. Another important aspect is demonstrating patience. That we are patient with our students and not overreactive. That, what are you doing? Why are you stop, do this, do that? That we're patient. Johnny, I need you to correct that behavior. Johnny, I need you to stop talking. Susie, please get back on the risers. Right? Our fictional Johnny and Susie, whoever we decide to pick here. Sorry if your name is Johnny or Susie out there and you're watching. That we demonstrate patience to our students. That we do not overreact. Yelling and screaming is just going to lose their respect very quickly. The next major aspect is consistency. And for many students, this demonstrates that you are treating them fairly and equally. That if one student has this punishment, you probably need to have that same punishment. Sometimes there are different circumstances that need to arise. And that kind of is why it's maybe important, and we'll talk more about in part 2, of kind of waiting until the end of class to really deliver any type of consequence. Have patience, don't overreact and be like, go to the office, do that. You're gonna have attention, Be patient and kind of work that out after discussing with the student the issues. So delivering behavioral correction in a consistent manner. This is also important in your expectations with the students. that if you expect them to raise their hands before they speak, that you do that every time, and you expect them, as soon as you start letting that go a little bit here and there, they're going to take more advantage of that and kind of think it's not an expectation. Or your expectation of them coming to the classroom. What is your expectation of that? And make sure it is consistent every time. It is such a critical component. If you start letting up at all, then they start taking advantage of it, and it is that rule or that expectation just kind of falls to the wayside, and you're going to have a lot of struggles trying to correct that then. And you're going to be more reactive than proactive. So jumping right into our discussion, the first aspect is setting up the classroom. And this was talked about in episode 2. And so we're not going to really discuss it much here, other than reminding you that it is so important to minimize distractions, that where students are looking, where the doors are placed, where the risers are placed, can minimize distractions. Having them place their cell phones away from them can minimize distractions. As well as setting up the room where the choral folio cabinets are placed separately or distanced apart, so they're not all crowding there, pushing and shoving. That just causes problems. Our next aspect is to clearly describe your expectations. This kind of has 2 parts. The first is to establish your classroom rules. Now, rules can sometimes have a negative connotation when you say, don't do this, no running, no jumping, none of this, right? It has a negative connotation. The opposite side of that is to have aspirational goals as your rules, such as respect your teachers, respect your peers. Both of these are used very well in the classroom, and both are practical to use. They both have issues, though, to consider. The first is, with aspirational goals, they're a little less specific. For example, if you want someone to spit out their gum and say, no gum in the classroom, well, where does that actually fall into respecting your teachers and respecting your peers? Well, is it following directions? Okay, yeah. But it doesn't really fit into a good niche of those aspirational goals that are most commonly used. On the other side, as I already mentioned, rules have a more negative connotation. Know this, know that. And so sometimes try to spin it into a more positive light. For example, raise your hand if you want to speak. Ask for permission to leave the risers, right? Stay on the risers at all times. No leaving the risers has a negative connotation. A good general rule is to follow all teacher directions. That just covers everything, right? The other part of establishing your expectations is establishing your procedures. How do you want students to enter and exit the class? How do you want them to pass in music, pass in materials? Where do you want their cell phones to go? All these procedures really help to minimize issues in the classroom, and they need to be established at the very beginning of the school year. This allows you to prevent problems from happening. Our next aspect, how do you phrase questions? And this is an important aspect, as often if we just say, what do you think about this? Then the student kind of just will automatically want to answer, right? You are inviting them to a conversation. If you are expecting them to raise their hand in your classroom, then preface your question with, by raising your hand, what do you think about this crescendo here? Whatever you want to talk about. The other aspect of this is part of discipline, which we'll get into next time in part 2. But saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You are asking a question, right? You don't necessarily want them to answer what they actually are doing, right? You know what they're doing usually. So why do you phrase that in a question? So instead of a question, say, I need you to get back on the risers, right? Instead of, what are you doing? Stop that. Our next aspect is, how do you transition between activities? From sight reading into the music, from warm up into sight reading. And a good way to minimize possible problems is to have some type of quick vocal exercise or a question in here. So say, as you're taking out this song, What do you recall from by raising your hand, yes, I should say that, by raising your hand, what do you recall we worked on last rehearsal? And so they start answering, and so there's one person talking at a time. All right, well, let's still look at measure 35, and go. And you're moving right in. Another approach is to have a vocal exercise, or maybe you know there's a difficult sight reading interval, and so as you take out sight reading number 5, sing this with me. Do, mi, do. And you know, okay, there's going to be a difficult skip in there, and you start working through that skip as they're taking it out. All right, now let's look at number 5 and chanting or whatever you want to do next. And you jump right in. This helps minimize distractions, and so that requires you to have a clear plan. And that will be a future episode that we'll have talking about being prepared and having a clear lesson plan. And so in that lesson plan, you work out those transitions and what you're going to do, what you're going to ask, and how you're going to prevent people from starting to talk. That's usually when they start to talk, is when you transition between songs and activities and they start to get distracted and you have to go, all right, come back and pay attention again. You have to refocus them instead of keeping them focused the entire class time. Our next approach to proactively preventing misbehavior in the classroom is having an approach to the learning process. How do you introduce new music? Often many teachers will go section by section. All right, sopranos, sing this. All right, basses, sing this. And they move on. All right, basses and sopranos together. Instead, try to have all sections actively engaged throughout the entire learning process. Sopranos, sing. Basses, chant. Altos, counter rhythms. Whatever you want to do, have them do something. Basses, hum your notes if they've already learned it. All right, sopranos, now you know it. Hum your notes. So I don't want to hear you, but I want you to practice. I don't want you to hear too loud while I work with the basses. Altos, you're now chanting, and so forth. You move through this process as you go through teaching the music. And so they are actively engaged. And so this allows them not to be distracted and just kind of sit back and go, all right, and start talking to their friend. And then you have to say, basses, stop talking, right? We want to avoid that as much as possible and keep them engaged and actively engaged in the classroom and what you are doing in the lesson. Our last approach to classroom management for this part 1 section is to know your music well enough that you can look up and not have your head buried in the music. This is so difficult, I understand, for those teachers who are stuck behind the piano. But if you can not have your head down the whole time looking at the notes, this allows you to be monitoring the classroom. Whenever you have your back turned, whenever you have your head down, looking at the music all the time, students start to misbehave because they know you're not paying attention, right? So as much keep eye contact on the students that they know you are watching, you are monitoring them, and as soon as they start to have any type of misbehavior, you can minimize it and prevent it before it escalates into something greater and has to have more of a disciplinary action and consequence. So I know it's difficult, but it takes some extra practice time if you're not good at the piano to really prepare that music to teach it in the classroom. You should have it down, cold. You should know it without any issues in your head and not have to look at it, right? It's a lot to ask for teachers who are very busy, but if you can, it's going to save you a lot of heartache with classroom management issues. As we conclude, I want to invite our viewers to join us in sharing their insights into choral music education, specifically their approaches to classroom management. These videos are designed to be a little shorter, about 10 to 15 minutes, and so it's really difficult to fit everything in there and describe everything. And so in a special part 3 of episode 3, we're going to have videos from you all that you all send in with your approaches that maybe haven't been mentioned here in this video, your approaches to both discipline, which we'll talk about in part 2, as well as classroom management, those proactive approaches to preventing misbehavior. And so if you want to participate and send in a video about 30 seconds to a minute and a half where you describe these approaches that you have and that you implement, if you would send those by going to my website at the bottom of the description of this video, and then going to contact and attaching a link in the email to a Google Drive where you have your video uploaded and that I can download from there. So I hope you would participate in sharing your insights with the ChoralEd community. And then as always, until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope you continue to inspire and encourage the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.